On today's action-packed episode of Locked On Cubs, we talk about what the Cubs didn't do at the trade deadline and then talk about what they did do. We're going to get in and discuss why Willson Contreras and Ian Happ weren't dealt, how we feel about it, what we think about it, and then we will break down the couple trades they did make. A very big and important episode on Locked On Cubs. Join us next.
You are Locked On Cubs, your daily Chicago Cubs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cubs alongside Sam Olber. I'm Matt Cozy. Pleasure to be with you today. If this is your first time or long time to Locked On Cubs, a lot on tap for this episode. There's certainly been a lot of interesting days, really the last decade, Sam, with the Cubs, and today ranks right up there with that. The Cubs at the trade deadline did not trade Willson Contreras or Ian Happ. They did deal over the last few days 4 different relief pitchers, Martin, Effross, Robertson, and Givens in that order. But right now, the focus is on Contreras and Happ, and it leaves Cubs fans in a weird place.
Look, I want to make my stance perfectly clear because when we did our reaction video, I must not have done a good job of it. I am not upset that Jed Hoyer didn't settle for pennies on the dollar for Contreras or Ian Happ. Why would anybody want you to trade these guys and get back guys that you don't believe that are actually good? I'm upset because I thought that this trade deadline was another opportunity for the Cubs to get better. They did an awesome job last year in basically the same exact situation, not Happ, but Contreras, with Chris Bryant on an expiring deal, Javier Baez on an expiring deal, and Anthony Rizzo on an expiring deal. And they turned in some of their top prospects in their entire organization there. And maybe that success ended up working to their detriment this time around, and teams were a little bit more hesitant to deal for a guy like Willson Contreras, seeing how it went for Baez and seeing how it went for Bryant. That's obviously a possibility. But the way Jed Hoyer set this up, and you know, I know he said today that, well, we never made it obvious that we were going to trade him. I'm calling you out on that, man. I mean, it was the Marquee Sports Network is owned by the Chicago Cubs. If the Cubs thought that there was a 15, 20, 25% chance they weren't going to be traded, they wouldn't have done that entire coverage of Contreras and Happ's, goodbye day. Like, everybody thought that this was a done deal. I think Jed Hoyer completely overestimated either the value for those guys or overestimated the market. I just, as a fan, I want to be perfectly clear. I support these deals. I don't think, and I have no knock, Matt, personally, on Willson Contreras. He is a piece to a great baseball team. He is not, in my opinion, a building block to a great baseball team. And I believe Jed Hoyer believes that, at least at the catcher position, because if Jed Hoyer believed that, there would be a lot more extension chatter and talks. There hasn't been. Ian Happ is a nice baseball player. I do not believe Ian Happ is a building block to a great baseball team. We're talking about two guys that ironically have the very identical career numbers, hitting in the low 250s for their career, low 800s OPS for their career. Nice players. Obviously, Willson Contreras is more valuable because he's a catcher, but as Buster Olney has stated multiple times during this deadline, the rest of the league and Jed Hoyer himself, they don't view Willson Contreras as a catcher anymore in the future. He's becoming a DH. His defense is a problem. And so when you take that bat and you make him a DH, it's a nice player. It's not a building block. I was hoping, because of the start that he had and the start that Ian Happ had that gave them deserved all-star bids, the Cubs would be able to take those starts, sell high on one guy that for sure they did not want to be on the baseball team next year. They would have extended them already. And then one guy in Ian Happ that you would just be selling really high on, that Jeff Passan and multiple guys said that, it was a bidding war basically for him, and better your future, better your long-term outlook, and then start the winning process next year. And that didn't happen, and I was really disappointed that it didn't happen.
If the Cubs were not going to extend Contreras, which there was a report last week that the last time they actually, it was either that they spoke formally and or offered an extension, was 2017. So that's 5 years ago. That's in professional sports terms, it's a light year ago. There wasn't any indication that they were interested in signing Contreras up for multiple years. That was for a number of reasons, namely his defense. He ranks at towards the very bottom. He's about fifth to last in overall catching metrics, receiving, blocking, throwing to bases. Part of the receiving is getting strikes at the right time, getting strikes when they're not, and framing. And he has really regressed behind the dish. And so if you weren't going to extend him, which isn't an opinion, it's a fact, because they hadn't gone to the drawing board, they hadn't gone to the negotiating table for years, then there's no excuse not to trade him. In the moment, I thought it was a clear and utter failing. The emotional Cubs fan in me, the emotional side, turned in from hey, it's a complete utter failing, into really just confusion, because there's no value that's in return for Contreras now. And we can get into all the minutia of it.
Sure.
We got the whole show. This is all we're talking about today for the most part here on Locked On Cubs.
We're not talking about the effort in St. Louis tonight. This team offensively is really slumping.
Right. This whole scenario with the Cubs, and we've mentioned it on our show before. We're about 25 episodes in now. It's been a lot of fun, but it's just very complicated. And today was a day where, none of this situation was cleared up. In fact, we just added to the list of the complicated nature of all this. And, I don't know if Jed Hoyer, had too high of a price on these guys. I think reading between the lines in his press conference today, and he's going to probably build out his thoughts more on Friday when the Cubs get back to Wrigley. He mentioned that at the end of his presser today. But the market just wasn't there for Contreras. And to an extent, it wasn't there for Happ either, in the sense that you look at all these other teams across the league, and they did acquire bats.
Darren Ruff.
And I think that's my main thoughts initially.
Yeah, and to your point, like, it's a failure not to trade him. Yes, but the people are going to respond and say, well, they didn't have the right offer on the table. But at the end of the day, harsh or not, that's on Jed for not getting the right offer. You are a salesman.
Obviously they didn't have the right offer.
Yeah, right. Nobody is saying make an offer you don't like. But what we are saying is that you didn't extend him, and everybody knows, okay? And I don't want to hear this. This is what bothered me. Don't pretend like it was like, oh, yeah, we were going to keep him all along if we didn't have the right offer. No shot, okay?
No, there's no way.
That's
just not true.
A foregone conclusion to trade him, and you oversold it, and you didn't deliver. We don't know the negotiating process and how it went, but what we do know, at least I feel this way, and this is just my opinion, that Jed Hoyer 100% went into the deadline knowing he was going to trade Willson Contreras and didn't. And at the end of the day,
right,
part of being a GM is being a salesman, and he didn't sell Contreras good enough to get something that he would have wanted. So now, and I guess, Matt, maybe we'll talk about this a little later on.
Yeah.
It puts you in a situation where you're in a really weird spot with Contreras. Happ's a little bit more understandable because you could have him on the team next year. Maybe he can help you. Maybe he can't. We'll see how he finishes out this year. Ian Happ is a very volatile hitter. He could easily finish this year in a very underwhelming season with the way he's going. Maybe he gets hot again. We don't know. But Contreras is a really, really interesting situation. We'll talk about that.
And just to follow up on part of your open, Sam, before we extend the convo, Marquee, actually, I was impressed in a way that they showed all that last week.
It was they're telling you, hey, Willson Contreras, great guy, helped us win a championship. Let's give him his farewell. We all know he's going to be traded. And that's part of the problem here is just the deceiving part of it. Like, it's just very weird.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts here. Let's see here. Let me tell you about Blue Nile. Make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com. Remember, there are two parts to this business: engagement rings, wedding bands, and also everyday fine jewelry, diamonds, rings, gemstone necklaces, etc. And going on now is the Blue Nile anniversary sale. Save up to 40% on classic fine jewelry pieces and 25% on engagement ring settings. Plus, as we all know, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging, so that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece of jewelry bling. Go to BlueNile.com today.
Matt, I'd like to talk about Contreras' future here and what this means, and then we'll break down the trades the Cubs did make today.
Yeah, and I think I got some stuff on Happ as well.
Yeah, a lot of people when we went live were like, "Oh, well, now they're just going to extend them." No, that is probably not going to happen.
What evidence do you have that says that?
Yeah, and if you don't agree with that, then that is in your right, of course. But Jed Hoyer has proven he does not want to extend Willson Contreras. He does not want Willson Contreras to be the catcher of his next great team. That is what I believe. Whether you agree or disagree with that, that's up to you. Okay. I am in the minority. And again, I have nothing against Willson Contreras, the player. We don't win a World Series without him. The guy deserves to be right in the middle of that 2016 statue you always talk about, Matt.
Yeah, totally.
But I agree with that. That's my thing. I don't think Willson Contreras should be the catcher. Now, if you want to talk about maybe he accepts something cheaper to play a different position, okay, maybe we could talk about that. I'm not a fan of his high leverage skills offensively. Right. And now you're putting yourself in a situation. I just want to explain to our audience, because this is really complicated. I read a lot about it today. I had to learn about it. So the Cubs now are going to offer Willson Contreras a qualifying offer. What that means is basically you take the
probably.
Yeah. Right. Probably.
I think there's a scenario where they don't.
Right. No, because they're, and explain to people why you say that.
I think there's a scenario they don't offer the qualifying offer because
they don't want him to stay.
Yeah. I think it's complicated, but it's like, what if he takes it?
Right. So let me explain what the qualifying offer is. So the qualifying offer means they offer him a mean salary of like the top, I think it's like 125 player salary. It'll be like 17, 18 million usually is what it is. And then if he rejects it, whichever team he signs with gives the Cubs a compensatory pick. So technically they didn't lose him for nothing. Now what this does to Contreras is it hurts his value a little bit.
It dilutes his market.
Yeah, because now teams are going to become more hesitant to sign him. So in your point, there is a chance that he takes the qualifying offer from the Cubs and says, hey, I'll do another year. Give me the 18 million. I'll have another big year and then go back to free agency because obviously the market isn't great for me. Would that be good for the Cubs? I don't know. I don't think that's what Jed Hoyer wants, or else he would just pay him.
I think moving forward, that might be the worst option.
Yeah, and Jed Hoyer probably has his eyes on some other players that are going to cost around that much that he'd like to give money to. I don't know. It just becomes very murky and confusing heading into the offseason now with Contreras because they couldn't get this trade done. And by the way, it's actually probably worse for Contreras that they didn't get the trade done because he could have just become a straight up free agent.
Exactly.
And so it was worse for him as well, if that makes sense. So, overall, like I said, I want people to know I have, I get a lot of DMs and stuff, people get really upset at my takes on these guys. And I have no, there's a lot of guys on the Cubs I like, and I don't dislike Willson Contreras. I just think that it's been very obvious for a long time now, Matt, and please correct me if I'm wrong. That's what this show is, that Jed Hoyer does not believe he's going to be the backstop for the next great Cubs team. So for them not to be able to find a way to get value for him that they like, ultimately, in my opinion, is a failure.
Yeah, there's a little bit of shock value to hear that as a fan. Like, even when we talk about it, it's not that fun to talk about because Contreras is literally going to be a part of that statue. Opening day 2026, and it was already one thing that he wasn't really going out on like the best of terms, and they had really the send off. They built the runway, and then they have to close the runway. The flight doesn't take off. The flight's delayed. Now we got to come back, after the storm or whatever it is. I think this could really crush Contreras's market just because he's tied to the draft pick.
And obviously his market isn't what he thought it was either, or some team would have given up a nice level prospect for him.
No. And the one thing that is, just to acknowledge the other side of it, and I think you did mention it briefly, is that maybe somewhere in all this equation is a 2 or 3 year deal for a low amount of money. And sometimes Contreras catches, sometimes he DHs, sometimes he plays first base. Who's playing first base on the next good Cubs team? No idea.
No, it's a great point.
Why couldn't it be Contreras?
Yeah, and I would be totally if you did a 3-year, let's say $45 million deal with him catching.
Great example.
With him catching, maybe he has 1 or 2 guys he's the personal catcher for, and then he plays first. I'm on board with that.
Right.
That helps your team.
Right.
What I'm not on board with is 5 years, $100 million to play catcher 4 days a week. That's what I'm not on board with.
And I think there was a perception. Again, we don't know. So if you write below, hey, well, you don't know that you weren't at the table. Correct. I wasn't at the table.
And I never will be, by the way.
Right. So the perception is, okay, yeah, maybe he was asking $20 million a year. Hey, Willson, you just got illustrated your market. Here's the plan for you. You're a fan favorite catcher, first base, DH. Here's 3 years for X amount.
Could play left field the pinch.
That would be an extreme plot twist, but I would definitely welcome that.
Yeah, I wouldn't be opposed to that as well. As long as there's other building blocks that they're signing that could perform in the clutch.
Let's get a little bit into Ian Happ and more after this. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including all things baseball. After the Padres acquired Hader, Soto, Drury. I mean, how much time
Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio.
The Padres odds are so good right now, and BetOnline provided that today. They illustrated that shot up that they got, which is understandable. And you can head to betonline.net to see that, or download the app to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
The Padres just traded for Willie Mays.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Such an active team. One of the best in sports, I would say.
Let's talk about Ian Happ, and then let's break down the deals that they did make today.
Oh yeah, sure.
So what did you want to say about Mr. Happ, Mr. Matthew?
Well, my thing with Happ is I never got a full grasp on why they would trade him. I understood that his value was high, and he really hasn't been very consistent. He's been very up and down. There was one stage where he was sent to AAA a few years ago. He came back. He's really improved himself, especially from the right side of the plate. He's improved defensively. I think he's really only limited to left field. Left field DH, can play second.
He robbed the homer
pinch.
Today.
Yeah, that was an outstanding catch. So if the Cubs are competitive in 2023, which another show, I think Happ could be the left fielder.
Yeah.
I just don't know what his market is moving forward. If they do decide to put on 23, I don't know his mental status after going through this again.
Seems like
Do
he's
they
glad to
do
be back.
Yeah, do they go through it again in the winter? If they don't get it done in the winter, do they go through it in the
Yeah,
summer if the Cubs lose?
and
So yeah,
I think the counter what you're saying is it just had the vibes that they were going to sell high and get a lot for him,
I thought so.
and so I would I had said on the show I was on board trading Ian Happ as long as the return made sense. The return not making sense, okay, you keep him. I also think the Cubs feel pretty good about some outfield options heading into 23, right? You got Suzuki.
Yeah,
Hopefully you got Brendan Davis. Morel has now introduced
right.
himself as a potential piece. Maybe you go out and sign a Brandon Nimmo. Who knows? We have no idea what their budget is.
Mhm.
So maybe that was also pushing them to make the deal.
Yep.
But Hap's a little bit easier to understand why they wouldn't. They would have had to really like the return for that to happen. And obviously, Hoyer made it sound like today that they just weren't even close on these trades.
No.
It's just the Contreras one is the one that sticks because of his just contract situation. So
Yeah, and like we talked about in the instant reaction show, I think the Cubs maybe even had the framework of a deal with the Padres, but they got Soto, so that was thrown in the trash.
right.
And the other thing with Hap is, where were the teams coming from? Because we heard some reports about the Dodgers, the Blue Jays, but that was really it. That was
weird deadline for the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Chris Martin and Joey Gallo.
Yeah, strange.
I thought that Joey Gallo thing wasn't going to affect the Hat market. I thought they'd slide in anyway. It's all over now. What does it make a difference?
Yeah.
Matt, let's talk about what they did do. So they did trade David Robertson to the Phillies, got back an arm that I believe is going to be slotted as the number 11th rated
Number
prospect
11.
in their
Yep.
system. Ben Brown.
Ben Brown.
He's six
Right-handed
foot
pitcher.
Yeah, 6'6", 97-mile-an-hour fastball, has those characteristics of a slider. We did break down the Scott Efros deal at length, so I don't want to be redundant, but I think that's the deal the Cubs feel the best about. And then they traded Mychal Givens to the Mets, which I thought, like you thought, there was going to be something else that came out of that. Tell us about the Mets return. I know it's another pitcher.
Yeah, Saul Gonzalez. He's same height as Brown, 6'6". He's right-handed. He throws hard, has a good slider, and this is the profile that the Cubs are looking at right now. And really, all three returns are very similar.
Yeah.
The only thing with Gonzalez is that he throws out of the bullpen already in single A.
And good for them for feeling like, if you watched our episode after the Dodgers series, I was very adamant that the Cubs had a run prevention issue, how to develop pitching, defense, all that stuff, high quality stuff. And it looks like that is their number one priority here during this rebuild, is figuring out how to prevent runs at a higher rate and to get themselves in the same ballpark as a Milwaukee, a Dodger situation, a Yankees, the Rays, the Guardians. These are teams.
Man.
These are teams that are really good at preventing runs and really good at developing pitching. And it looks like the Cubs are starting to figure that out. So that's nice to see.
Right.
And that's what they targeted in all their trades. So.
Yes, they did. And in the draft. So obviously they paid a price for not developing a single pitcher for dang near a decade. But you could clearly see what they're trying to do within the last couple of years. So definitely this summer.
And we talked about this on last night's show about deadline memories. And I just want to let people, because I know people are going to come at me and say, why are you so mad? Well, in the past, the Cubs have some of the most important deals in the history of this organization came from selling at the deadline. I mean, you're talking about Arrieta and Strop. You're talking about Hendricks. You're talking about Addison Russell. These are, you never want to be sellers. Nobody wants to be. Nobody.
No.
Right? And it's a lot easier to be a seller than it is to be a buyer, because most of the time in baseball, the team that's buying is not going to win the World Series. It's just math. The Padres just added the best hitter in Major League Baseball, 23 years old, and they are still not even the favorite to win the World Series. winning the World Series in baseball is a crapshoot. Sometimes teams like Atlanta get really hot, like last year, and win it. Sometimes teams are great wire to wire, like the 16 Cubs, but it's not like basketball. In basketball, if you do a trade of the equivalent of getting Josh Hader and Juan Soto, you're most likely, if you stay healthy, you're going to win the championship. In baseball, it's not like that. So the seller always looks better, right? Because the buyer's trying to win a World Series. If they don't, and then they give up a bunch of prospects, right? Like they look like, imagine if the Cubs didn't win the World Series and Chapman then went back to the Yankees and they lost Gleyber Torres, right? It just looks bad.
It worked out in that sense.
Or the Quintana deal, right? The Cubs didn't win a World Series from that, and Cease is great, and Eloy's more of a question mark, but that's that's neither here nor there. So that's
not why you called.
Yeah, my point is even though you don't like being a seller, and let's hope that this is the last time for a long time the Cubs are sellers.
Let's hope.
Being a seller at the trade deadline is a tremendous opportunity to better your ball club, especially when you have assets that you feel like are assets. And you have two guys. One guy is a champion and another guy made the all-star team. And to not turn them into anything to help the future of your baseball team at the trade deadline, even though the offers weren't there, makes me upset. And I think I have the right to feel that way.
Be sure to hit the subscribe button for Locked On Cubs on YouTube and smash the like button on all your favorite Cubs content. We're also on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, you can leave us a voicemail or drop us a text, 312-834-4634. Thanks for making Locked On Cubs your first listen every day. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. For Sam Olber, I'm Matt Cozy. This has been Locked On Cubs.